Hey guys! I'm just popping in to let you all know, for a number of reasons, that this video essay is much more casually edited than prior ones. Since chapters 3 and 4 of Deltarune are nearly here, I had to scale back to release this video on time. I hope you all understand. Now let's get into it. Oh, this is beautiful. What's up, Buttercups? My name is Scaletree, and even though I haven't talked much about Toby Fox's games on my channel, my excitement for chapters 3 and 4 of Deltarune is impossible to overstate. Here's my possibly hot take. I think Deltarune could end up better than Undertale. While, yes, several larger gamers on YouTube have commented that it so far feels like something is missing, let's be real. Undertale came out as a complete game. It has a beginning, middle, and end regardless of whether you slay, spare, or something in between. And, despite the fact that Deltarune is meant to parallel with, and perhaps even be completed by, Undertale, and vice versa, Deltarune does not yet have that luxury. And likely won't for several more years. But it does come with the plus that we can speculate, hypothesize, and theorize along the way. And boy, do I have predictions! That will most likely be wrong, but why should I care if I'm having a good time? With chapters 3 and 4 looming ever closer, I wanted to make a video serving as a reflection of my thoughts, theories, and state of mind before they release. Now, aside from obvious incoming spoilers, I also want to state that, since these are personal postulations, everything here is speculative. I was never an active member of the Deltarune community, and I'm not very familiar with the discourse outside of chess theory. To be clear, this video mostly covers the thoughts I had independently based on in-game info, the updated Steam page, and the latest trailer. Some of my ideas may happen to align with other people's, but at the same time, I'm sure there are dozens, if not hundreds, of thoughts and theories that may differ from my own. So please, don't hesitate to share yours. I'd love to see them in the comments. Just be respectful to me and to each other, lest I choose to shatter you across time and space. Seriously, we're all just here to have fun today. Let's be chill about it. Today, I'll discuss world building, all the characters I have things to say about, and my predictions for future chapters. I'll be focusing on the normal route instead of the weird route, which may be its own video one day because there's a lot to talk about there. So, without further ado, let's brace ourselves and take the plunge into the dark yet darker world of Deltarune. For the world building portion of this video, let's start with the light world. Part of me is tempted to theorize on Undertale, its timeline, and where Deltarune could place. But I won't, since I'm not convinced they're part of the same universe. I could potentially see the game as a separate timeline where the war of humans and monsters never happened, but there are a few things about the nature of Deltarune's monsters that prevents me from fully buying that. To start, I'm under the impression that monsters don't have magic in the light world. Toriel's stove has batter cake to it, while in Undertale it's implied she uses fire magic when baking. Noelle laments twice about fixing things with a spell, and explicitly wishes she could use magic to cure her hospital-bound father of his mysterious condition. Deltarune's Mettaton is presumably a ghost since he lives with Napstablook, and this makes sense since his Undertale quiz battle says robots are made of metal and magic. Without magic, there are no robots, and therefore no mechanical body for our favorite star. Hell, when Kris speaks to Catti in Chapter 2, she talks about magic in an occult sense rather than as a facet of day-to-day life. So, all in all, magic as we know it appears to only be usable in the Dark Worlds. Aside from that curious difference, there's another thing that struck me when reading Queen's speech at the end of Chapter 2. While she monologues about her desire to spread darkness, she says the following. "This power of determination. Is this not something that all Lightners possess?" Queen makes it clear that dark fountains can only be created by beings with determination, and shows icons of Susie and Noelle during this speech. However, in the true lab segments of Undertale, Alphys experimented on comatose monsters by injecting them with determination to see if their souls could persist after death. It revived her test subjects, but their bodies didn't have enough physical matter to handle so much determination, and eventually combined into amalgamates. Now, I'm not saying that Undertale monsters are fully devoid of determination. On a neutral run, if you kill Undyne, she struggles to not die and becomes melty in her final moments, which is probably determination trying to hold her together. But this does beg the question of how much determination a Deltarune monster can have compared to a human, and the ramifications it has on their biology. Could it be that a higher determination threshold is a perk they gain in exchange for their probable lack of magic? I'm not about to jump to any conclusions here, but I think this could be a fascinating discussion point. Anyway, let's move on to Hometown. I won't linger on it too long since I don't have lots of thoughts on it as a setting, and since I'll also bring it up when I talk about certain characters or the narrative structure. But, to start, I'm sure everyone and their mother has theories on the mysterious locked bunker to the far south. It just reeks of potential. Like a dark fountain. Maybe Gaster? More on that later. Aside from that, this is definitely more of a guess than anything, but I'm wondering what lies beyond the police tape. I think, at minimum, it's wherever Susie lives. I feel it would be a huge missed opportunity to not be able to see her home situation, and I don't think it's likely she lives somewhere we've already been to. It's also possible that Berdly's and Jockington's homes are past that tape as well, since they're the other classmates with talk sprites that don't have an obvious place where they live. As for what else might lie beyond, since a festival is coming soon, I might as well also guess that at least part of this area will have an event center, a large field, or some other spacious location where the bulk of the festival can take place. Yes, I'm aware it's mentioned that the whole town becomes like a carnival, but with how close everything is, where else are we supposed to fit a Ferris wheel? With that question, I think I'm done talking about the light world for now. Let's move on to the dark worlds. In the previous section, I touched upon the concept that dark worlds can be made by any lightener who puts will into their weapon of choice. And I'd also like to point out that Berdly attempts to channel his will into his halberd, about to make another dark fountain, within an existing dark world. More on that later, because whoa! So far, the locations for both dark worlds have had to do with forms of entertainment. Chapter 1 has board and card games, while Chapter 2 has computers and the internet. I think the end of Chapter 2 makes it clear that Chapter 3's Dark World will be based on TV. However, without going into the trailer, I think entertainment as a theme falls flat at Chapter 4. What makes more sense with that included is pulling back from the more specific theme to a broader theme of escapism. All the things I mentioned are ways people can distance themselves from their sometimes harsh reality, even if only for a bit. Hell, all of the monsters that have been to the Dark World seem to enjoy them more than the Light World. Which, well, I get it. Who hasn't wanted to jump into their favorite book or comic or TV show at some point? Who hasn't wished to be part of a world where things are more fantastical? Where problems can be solved by fights or friendships? Or magic? Where the burdens of reality are lifted from your shoulders? Maybe I'm getting unnecessarily deep, but it was just a fascinating thought, and one that a friend of mine shared as I recently watched her first blind playthrough of Chapters 1 and 2. It's not on YouTube, don't get too excited. Additionally, in a more meta sense, the gameplay in Deltarune's Dark World is much more like a classic RPG compared to the overworld's simpler Undertale menu. And video games, of course, can also be a source of escape. It is, quite literally, more fun to play in the Dark World, whereas in the Light World, most of what you do is go around and talk to people. Which, don't get me wrong, is enjoyable as well, but it doesn't feel as much like playing a game as the Dark World segments do, and I think that's by design. But honestly, apart from everything I've said so far, I have a lot more questions about Dark Worlds than I do speculative answers. I have no idea why the one in the school closet has the only pure dark fountain we're actually aware of, and no thoughts as to who could have made it, when they made it, why they made it, and how they ensured it was pure. Is the same person who made this dark fountain the knight who's making more? What difference is there in the composition or method of creating a pure dark fountain versus the ones we've had adventures in? Is it possible to make a second pure dark fountain, or can there only ever be one at a time? No thoughts, head empty, but these are questions that rotate in my mind a lot, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. One last thing before we switch over to talking about characters. Something I noticed about Ralsei's castle in the Legend of Deltarune cutscene is its shape. See the 4 wings? See that spire at the top that low-key resembles a save point? Now, whatever could that mean? Yes, I've decided to talk about Ralsei first. He's the odd one out for the characters I have capital T thoughts about when it comes to the greater narrative, since he's the only Darkner among them. I mean, I think it's likely that Lancer, Rules, Queen, and the Spade King are all going to play significant, if perhaps small, roles in one or more future chapters. But I digress. It's Ralsei time. This dude is sus to me, okay? In Chapter 1, he's obscured in shadow until the very end. In Chapter 2 and beyond, from the looks of it, he almost always has his hands behind his back. He knows things I feel like he shouldn't, like the layout of the school, whereas most Darkners seem unaware that they're objects on that plane of existence. He seems to talk to Kris privately when we're in Susie-centric cutscenes. He's always trying to steer the team away from negative thoughts and info unless he has no choice. Hell, he does it to himself at his own detriment if you repeatedly throw away his manual or attack his dummy too many times during the tutorial fight. Also, before that fight, Ralsei says the following. Now seems like a great chance to prepare for the enemy. In reference to a training dummy that looks just like him. Look, I'm not about to call Ralsei evil. I'm not about to call him malicious or even call into question his intentions. But he's up to something, and a line like that feels too much like foreshadowing for me to just toss it away. To be clear, whatever he's doing, I believe he thinks it's for the greater good. Why else would he emphasize the importance of using kindness and gathering recruits? It brings more Darkners to Castletown, but, by extension, more Darkners under his rule. Maybe he needs a lot of subjects for some reason. I'm just spitballing here. I'd also like to call to attention how aggressively Ralsei tells Susie that he didn't miss her, before clarifying that it was meant to be sarcasm. And how weirdly blushy he is around Kris. While I don't think Ralsei hates Susie by any stretch, I think it's possible that there's a kernel of truth in his outburst. That, plus the way he's always talking with Kris while we're in Susie-centric cutscenes, makes me think he prefers to spend time with Kris alone whenever possible. My best guess for why that is because of Kris's connection to us, the player, who Ralsei is speaking to directly during the tutorial fight in Chapter 1, I think. But if that's the case, why wait until we're absent? What could he have to say that's only for Kris's ears? But speaking of Kris... There's something so poignant about the dichotomy of the room they share with Asriel. One side is bright and cheerful and loved, if empty due to Asriel's absence. The other side is occupied since Kris still lives at home, but it feels hollow due to its lack of descriptions and decor. And it's not because Kris has no character. On the contrary, they react with annoyance when they can't play the piano with the player in control. They seem to have a history of being a practical jokester, messing with Noelle and possibly Asriel during their childhoods. And they very clearly favor Susie over Ralsei and Noelle when asked, or when given friend-tasting tea in Chapter 2. Hell, they even jump in to protect Susie at the end of Chapter 1 from the Spade King without any input from the player. Which, by the way, is so adorable. They like her so much. Anyway, unlike Frisk from Undertale, who you can argue is more of a shell for the player to project on, Kris is very clearly their own person. A person with little control of themselves. A person who relies on you to command their soul so they don't shamble from place to place. A person who's terrified to end up like Spamton, freed from their strings but incapable of being more than a simple puppet. They defy our will, of course. They eat the pie and presumably plug in the TV between Chapters 1 and 2. This sets up for the next time they set aside their soul to presumably slash Toriel's tires, which in turn makes Toriel feel like it's unsafe for Susie to go home, hence the sleepover. Which, in its own turn, sets up for the third time they do this, to turn on the TV, lean open the door, and create a dark fountain in their own living room. It's also worth mentioning that Kris could have anticipated Toriel would invite Susie inside to make pie, given Kris ate the previous one the night before. And all that begs the question, did they mastermind this sleepover? This dark fountain? I'm not fully convinced they did, but I think it's possible. If so, I have a few guesses as to why. I think part of it might be because they saw how much Susie was enjoying her time in the Dark Worlds, and wanted to ensure there would be another adventure for them to spend time together. Another part of it might be to convince their mom and/or Undyne of the existence of Dark Worlds. After all, their mom is present in the living room when Kris makes the fountain, so it's likely she'll end up in the new Dark World. Meanwhile, Undyne, a member of the police, which Toriel calls after her tires are slashed, is the only character in hometown that Kris can attempt to inform about dark fountains. But why would they go to such extremes if the latter is one of their reasons? Why would they want Undyne to know so badly? My guess is it may have to do with something happens to Noelle's sister. Des, short for December, is missing. Or at least, I think so? One could argue that she's dead, but since Noelle frequently searches her sister's name on the internet, evidenced by the calendar with a certain December holiday all over it in Queen's Mansion, I prefer to believe Des disappeared. But why? I'll bet this is one of those huge talking points in the fandom, and I'm probably not going to say anything new here, but I wanted to be thorough since this is on my mind quite a bit, particularly in relation to Kris. See, the other kids seem to think Kris is afraid of the bunker at the bottom of town, with Snowy calling them a weenie for what Kris said about it. And Kris, without any input from the player, backs away from the first dark fountain we see with Susie at the start of Chapter 1. This suggests to me that Kris has not only seen a dark fountain before, but has witnessed something frightening in relation to it. Of course, they decide making a new one is worth it by the end of Chapter 2, but that doesn't change their initial response. So, what could have happened? Well, it's possible they witnessed December disappear into a dark fountain in the bunker and never return. Gone, but not forgotten, in a different way than death. Personally, I think it makes sense. I'm almost certain Ralsei at some point says that Kris is the only one who can seal dark fountains, presumably because Kris is human. The only human in town. For now, it isn't confirmed if Lightners can leave these impure dark worlds until Kris seals the fountains. If they can't, and if Kris never entered the possible dark fountain in that bunker, it could mean Des is stuck for good unless Kris braves that dark world to save her. Not that I think Kris would be aware of that specific detail, but it could be they want Undyne to know these fountains exist so they can finally show her where Des might have gone. Now, hold on. I'm sure some of you may be thinking that I'm jumping to conclusions here. And you're right. This is me playing around and connecting dots, and I'm not about to be that person who says this is the definitive truth. But if you'll indulge me for just a little longer, I can share an even more ridiculous connected idea before grounding myself back in reality. Dark, darker, yet darker. The darkness keeps growing. The shadows cutting deeper. Photon readings negative. This next experiment seems very, very interesting. What do you two think? Entry number 17 has been a mystery in Undertale for ages, and while I won't pretend like I'm going to solve it, I might as well don my tinfoil hat. One of the pieces of discourse I've seen around Deltarune that was kind of unavoidable is that Gaster has his paws all over the game. His leitmotif is everywhere. The sound that plays for Entry 17 occurs if you try to use your cell phone in the Dark Worlds, and I think I even heard that the vessel creator from Chapter 1 is called the Goner Maker. There's probably more that I'm not listing, but this is what comes to mind while writing this script. All that said, Undertale's information confirmed to be about Gaster is famously sparse. TLDR. He was the previous royal scientist who fell into his creation one day because his experiment went wrong. As a result, he was shattered across time and space. With that brief summary out of the way, let me upgrade my tinfoil hat to a rainbow wig and clown nose. It's clear from entry number 17 that Gaster has always been associated with darkness. Remember what I said earlier about Berdly almost making a dark fountain within a dark world? What if that means there are other layers of darkness? What if the darkness Gaster is talking about is literal? What if he made dark fountains within dark fountains at some point in Deltarune's universe to get somewhere dark, darker, yet darker? So far removed from the light, in fact, that photon readings return with a scientifically impossible negative. in a place where shadows can cut you, and perhaps even shatter you across time and space? Perhaps even shatter you across games? Don't worry, I'm honking my clown nose for this. Bringing this back around to Des, what if Gaster is the person behind the potential dark fountain in the bunker, and therefore the one who caused her disappearance? I'm not saying it was intentional, per se. I think Gaster himself is most likely stuck in a dark world of his own creation, but that would be one hell of a way to vanish. By extension, it's possible that one of the two people Gaster references in Entry 17 could be Des, if she ended up trapped in the same place. Who's the other one? No idea. I'm just hurtling down a conspiracy hole and I can barely see the light anymore. If only I could find someone with wings to lift me back to the surface. Oh. You two will do. Funny enough, I don't have a lot to say about Noelle and Berdly that are exclusively about themselves as people. While I do have some thoughts, I feel like most of them revolve around the normal versus weird roots, which I already mentioned I'm not discussing in this video. That said, I wanted to at least chime in with a few quick things. Noelle is sweet, if also super thirsty. I have a feeling her mom may be the mayor since their respective characteristics seem consistent with one another, as well as the fact that Noelle clearly lives in a wealthy, gated home. But that's nothing about Noelle proper. That said, her character growth in Chapter 2 during the normal route is heartwarming to me. It was good to see her stand up for herself. I get the feeling Queen reminded her in a roundabout way of her own mom, who's more controlling and strict. I hope that Noelle learns from this experience in the dark world, even if she thinks it's just a dream, to be assertive when she needs to in front of her mother. I'm interested to see what happens there. Moving on to Berdly on the normal route. This may be controversial since I've heard reception to him is mixed, but I honestly admire his Chapter 2 character development if you free him from Queen's control. It's nice to see him break his intellectual superiority for a minute, consider Kris and Susie as legitimate study partners, and then admit that it might not be so bad. This could be the start to him opening up and turning into a better, more humble person. I think he could grow into a character I can respect just as much as I can laugh with. Maybe even a favorite. As for my current favorite character... You guys seriously didn't think I forgot Susie, did you? Come on, she's iconic. She's already grown a lot and it's only been 2 chapters. She freaking loves her first friends. She's low-key chosen Kris as her bestie, and I will die on this hill. She's not afraid to break the mold. She's oblivious to obvious flirting. She's constantly hungry like another one of my favorite video game characters. She is glorious. So, I have a pair of extremely different thoughts on what might happen with Susie. First, remember how I said she's low-key chosen Kris as her bestie? You know, the person who jumps instantly to her defense. The person she chooses to spend the rest of the day with after the Chapter 2 adventure, even though she could have easily stayed in Castletown with Ralsei and Lancer. The person she's eager to have a sleepover with. The person she instantly defends the moment she hears even a soft insult like weenie shot their way. I'm calling it here. I think it's only a matter of time until she learns that Kris is our puppet. Now, when I discussed this with friends, they agreed it was possible and mentioned how epic it would be if Susie got pissed at us and tried to fight us to free Kris from our control. And yes, I agree this would be awesome, and I'm not opposed even 1 iota. But I must admit, my first train of thought went in another direction. What if she feels betrayed? Was Kris's friendship a lie? Was it something that the puppeteer chose to have them perform instead of something they wanted? Could you imagine a return or reprise of the Versus Susie theme in a 1v1 with her and Kris, designed to remind us of her fight with Lancer back in Chapter 1? Could you imagine her breaking at the thought that her closest and dearest friend might have never even liked her? I mean, we, the players, know that isn't true, but I wouldn't blame her if she jumps to this conclusion. It could be an emotionally charged, heartbreaking, pure angst fest of a scene meticulously crafted to fracture our souls into a million pieces. Or maybe I'm just being dramatic. On a more positive note, I wanted to bring up Susie beginning to learn healing magic in Chapter 2. Not only is it a sweet point of development, wanting to try magic to help rather than harm, but I imagine that the strength of Ultimate Heal will only grow in time. And with her character. I think it would be quite poetic if, as she learns to let others in, and perhaps recovers from the traumas of her strongly implied bad home life, her Ultimate Heal becomes exactly what it says. The best healing ever. I think something like that could be so satisfying to see. With this section wrapping up, I'm almost ready to talk about broader implications in the narrative. But not before we talk about... From this moment on, there will be spoilers for the trailer and Steam pages showing off Chapter 3 and 4. So if you're not prepared, now's the time to hop off, watch that trailer, and come back. I'll wait. For those of you who stayed or returned, let's keep going. It's time for a perfectly rational observation, such as... Jockington is gonna be in Chapter 4! Jockington! Growing a beard is a trope where something gets better over time! Jockington! Curiosity high, intelligence low! Jockington! He's a dork who loves sports! Jockington! Put him in a purse and dress him up, yeah! Okay. I'm calm. I'm fine. I'm normal. It's just, Jockington ticks off a distressing number of boxes on the traits of characters I like list. So, just by existing as a goofy noodle, I have a sneaking suspicion he could turn into a new favorite by the end of Chapter 4. I don't know what to do with this information. In all seriousness, the fact that Jockington is in Chapter 4 suggests to me that Catti will be there too. After all, since Chapter 1, the two of them were set up to be a bonded pair. And this is an intriguing possibility, given the occult stuff I mentioned about Catti, and the fact that Chapter 4 looks suspiciously like it could take place in the church. She's also, undeniably, a cool character who I'd love to learn more about. Not to mention that the two of them are the last students in Kris's class who have talk sprites, so I had a feeling they would be important characters sooner or later. As for what the hell they're doing there, or what they'll contribute narratively at that point, who's to say? I think to speculate on that would require context on the Light World section of Chapter 3, which we simply won't get until June. Oh well, I'm excited nonetheless. No transition here, just sans. To be clear, I don't think he's going to play a major narrative role, but I just wanted to point out that my current hypothesis is that Deltarune Sans is the Sans we meet in Undertale, prior to knowing who and what we are. His theme in the restaurant in Undertale is titled, "It's Raining Somewhere Else." Perhaps that somewhere is hometown. In that same scene, he says he understands the feeling of wanting to go home. During his genocide route battle, he mentions how he gave up trying to go back a long time ago, right before clarifying that the surface doesn't interest him either, so wherever it wasn't Undertale's main destination. The picture by the schematics of the machine he presumably was building to go home has the words "Don't Forget" on them, which is the name of the credits song in Deltarune. In addition, I think he may have different physiology from the Undertale monsters, since he's the only one that bleeds. Not to mention that the Snowden Keeper says he just showed up one day and asserted himself, which is a weird backstory to say the least. Look, I acknowledge this may also sound ridiculous, and it doesn't necessarily take Papyrus into account, but I just wanted to put it out there. I could very well be wrong, and I'd be fine with that, but I think it's a fun idea nonetheless. With that little aside out of the way, I finally want to talk about... I can almost see the light at the end of the tunnel. We're approaching the dark fountain to seal it, but first, it's time for the final section of this video. My predictions. I'll start by discussing a few patterns I noticed from chapters 1 and 2 that I think may continue, then touch on some broader narrative ideas that came to me. Now, in chapters 1 and 2, there are 3 distinct areas in each Dark World: a beginning section, a middle section, and the boss's lair or final section. I imagine the structure will continue in all of the Dark Worlds, even if at least one of them, Kris's fountain, isn't explicitly made by the Roaring Knight. It just feels cleaner that way. In addition, Sham more or less already confirms that each chapter will have a secret boss who's harder than the final boss, grants a shadow crystal upon defeat, and gives a powerful weapon or piece of armor depending on how you beat them. From the sounds of things, if he gets them all, he can turn the shadow crystals into the pure crystal, which is a currently inaccessible item. I believe both secret bosses so far have wanted some form of freedom, so it would make sense for that to continue as a theme. To be clear, I find the lore around Spamton more interesting than Jevil, so I barely remember that clown's motives, so if I'm wrong, just let me know. As for the final bosses, have you all noticed that both Queen and the Spade King have respectively called themselves the villain and bad guy of their chapters? Even Lancer does it at one point, although he has a change of heart before the final fight of Chapter 1. My guess would be that the upcoming final bosses of each impure Dark World will continue to follow this trend of explicit, performative evil. Remember how I mentioned that the Dark Worlds seem to have these prevalent themes of escapism? Well, adding on to that, wouldn't it be nice to be in a world where the villains outright state their intentions? I mean, plenty of real duplicitous people either have no desire to show their true colors, or operate under the assumption that what they're doing is for the greater good, and we'll all come to understand their ways in time. After all, they had such good reasons for doing what they did that the ends justify the means. Not to mention, if there are obvious bad guys for you to chase, it would be interesting if they were there to set up for a twist that the real enemy was someone else all along. Moving right along, I'd be remiss not to bring up chess theory, which I mentioned at the start of the video as the one piece of Deltarune discourse I'm actually pretty familiar with. The TLDR of chess theory is that the bosses for chapters 1 through 6 will be themed in order from most to least value of chess pieces: king, queen, rook, bishop, knight, and pawn. Then, Chapter 7 would have a boss that breaks this mold, which could be Gaster, ourselves, or maybe a certain fluffy boy. I'm not about to guess that far ahead. I'd feel more comfortable after Chapter 5 or something. Anyway, I think this theory continues to have merit. For obvious reasons, a bishop-themed boss would work well in Chapter 4 due to the Dark World's apparent church setting. As for the Rook, which is a piece that's sometimes informally called a castle or a tower, I want to focus on that last bit. The Dark World for Chapter 3 will be themed around TV, so what if the Rook in question is a TV tower? Or, alternatively, what if the boss battle takes place in one? I've heard Tenna thrown around as the possible name of the boss in Chapter 3, and while I don't know much about where that comes from or why, TV antennas translating into a TV tower boss sounds like a sick final fight. Rule of cool and all. We might even have gotten a snippet from the trailer. Time for a couple of predictions I haven't mentioned earlier. Dark World locations. I think it's reasonable to assume that we'll eventually get to access that bunker at the bottom of town, and while I won't be mad if I'm wrong, I'm currently convinced that there's a Dark World in there. I also think, going back to escapism for a sec, that it's likely we'll have a festival-themed Dark World in Chapter 5. After all, the upcoming festival in Hometown has been set up since Chapter 1, and it's most likely to take place on a Sunday in-game so it wouldn't disrupt school. At least, that's how I'd set it up if I were mayor. Don't want kids ditching class. Next, onward to more plot predictions. I feel at some point it's inevitable for Ralsei to find out that Kris made the Chapter 3 Dark Fountain. And personally, I don't see him being all that happy. After all, Kris is present while he reveals lore about the Roaring, and Kris making another Dark World goes against what Ralsei is constantly pushing them to do: seal the Dark Fountains. I'm not as sure if Susie would be present for such a revelation or not, but if she is, I think she'd be a bit more understanding, funnily enough. Dipping back to chess theory for a second, if it's right, then I believe Chapter 5 could introduce us at long last to the Knight. But since there are going to be 7 chapters, I doubt they would be defeated in Chapter 5. I think it's more likely that the Roaring would begin in Chapter 6 or 7 before the Knight can be stopped. Or, in a twist, we could fight them to stop the Roaring, but by the time we're done, it's already too late. Something like that could be an intensely dramatic scene, and I would live for it. Speaking of characters being introduced, I predict that we'll see the vessel we created in Chapter 1 before the game ends. That can't have all been for nothing. I'm sure its existence or lack thereof will be relevant later. After all, the game saves the name of the vessel's creator to name the castle town after the player. It's not too much of a stretch, at least for me, to assume the vessel will play a role at some point. As for the ending of the game, I feel like we need to let Kris go. They don't like being controlled by us, and I think they make that clear often enough. And despite their behavior, I'm actually kind of worried about them. Depending on how the story beats come out, I think it could be narratively satisfying to finally cut them free of our strings. And, unlike Spampton, give them a chance to fly rather than fall. At this point, I'm more or less done talking about the things I'm most excited about, but I wanted to throw a neat pair of ideas out there. I wouldn't call them predictions so much as wouldn't it be cool ifs, but I don't think they're outside the realm of plausibility. Remember how, in Undertale, the game asks you to name the fallen human? It's a major revelation by the end of the pacifist route that the person you name isn't the same character as Frisk, the human you control from beginning to end. The fallen human, Kara, is Asriel's adoptive sibling from many years ago. I think if Toby Fox made a storytelling twist like this once, he could do it again. No, I'm not saying that Kris is the vessel, but what if the cat that purifies the crystals isn't Sham? What if it's Catti with her knowledge of the occult? Well, okay, I think that's pretty unlikely, so let's get a little more interesting. What if the Prince from the Dark, meant to help the Lightners banish the Angels' heaven, isn't Ralsei? After all, we have another Prince from the Dark already. It's Lancer. I can't say I'm committed to this thought as a prediction, especially since Lancer comes from an impure Dark Fountain. But hey, it could be a cool fanfic premise at least. There you have it. A brief synopsis of my current thoughts, feelings, speculations, predictions, and all else in between for Deltarune. I didn't get the chance to fit in literally everything, but I touched upon all the stuff I wanted to for now, so I'm content to leave things here. With that, I believe we've reached the end of this video. If you've stuck around this long, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed my content. If you like this video and are interested to see more, I'm sure you know what to do. In the meantime, I've been your hostess Scaletree, and I hope to see you around. Bye, guys!